Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a Monoblue Serpent Affinity deck, which is a deck full of cheap artifacts that help us power out an early Gearseeker Serpent, which costs 1 generic mana less to cast for each artifact we control. So this reminds us of the affinity mechanic of the original Mirrodin block, so that's where the name of the deck comes from. So in order to cast an early Serpent, we do need to play some less than ideal artifacts. So we do need to play some of these cheap, not so powerful artifacts in order to power out the Serpent, but they do have some synergies with each other, and we do have some other payoff cards here for being a mono-blue artifact deck, and one of them is Westvale Abbey, which is a land that can turn some of our mediocre creatures and tokens into an Ormondal Profane Prince, which is a 9/7 flying lifelink indestructible haste creature that can easily take over the game. And we've got some other payoff cards that we'll get to in a second. So let's take a look at the entire deck, starting out with Bonesaw, probably one of the weakest cards by itself. A 0 mana artifact that is an equipment, gives a creature +1/+0 for just 1 generic mana. So when it comes to casting Gearseeker Serpents, this is basically a Lotus Petal, and then it can also do some useful stuff later on, so it's not a terrible card. And of course, having a cheap artifact is pretty useful in this deck. We also have a Bonded Construct as a 1-drop artifact creature, a 2/1 that can't attack alone, so will usually only be attacking around turn 3, but it's still useful for powering out early Gearseekers and can also crew vehicles even if it can't attack alone, and of course it can always block by itself if that's something we're interested in. We also have 3 copies of Glint-Nest Crane, which in this deck is always gonna find an artifact unless we're super unlucky. And also just a 1/3 flyer, so not a bad card in this deck, can help us find the artifact we need. We've got 2 copies of Lupine Prototype, which is pretty decent in this deck since we've got a lot of ways to empty our hand right away, and then this becomes a 2 mana 5/5 creature. Can also crew vehicles even if he can't attack or block, so still has some uses even if we do not have an empty hand. 4 copies of Eager Construct, just a nice 2/2 creature for 2 mana that scries 1, so can help us find the missing pieces. Of course, 2 copies of Smuggler Copter, because it's a great artifact and goes well into a more aggressive deck, and we can certainly use some powerful cards in this deck. And then the third Smuggler Copter is Sky Skiff. Not nearly as powerful as Smuggler Copter, but still fine to have access to an additional flying creature, and when the board does stall out a little bit, having that additional flyer can be useful. 3 copies of Chief of the Foundry, since most of our deck is artifacts, giving them +1/+1 is a good idea. Same with Foundry Inspector, making our artifacts cheaper helps us put them into play faster, so we can play an early Gearseeker. And if we do draw some cards later on in the game, having them cost 1 less is also nice. And then 2 copies of Cultivator's Caravan, which helps twice with casting the Gearseeker because it's an artifact that also adds mana, so can help us certainly cast Gearseekers around turn 4, and then we can also crew it with the Gearseeker the turn we play it, so if it's not tapped it can just get in there for 5, and has some other neat synergies in the deck as well. 2 copies of Grip of the Roil as our only real interactive card in the deck, and the surge cost here is quite nice since we do have a few copies of Bonesaw and Bonded Construct, so those cheap cards help us enable surge more easily, and then we can maybe deal with a problematic creature on the opposing side and draw a card, so a nice interactive card to have access to. Then one of the better cards in the deck is Whirler Rogue, 4 mana for a 2/2 that makes 2 Thopter tokens, and then very important in this deck, we can tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to make a creature unblockable until end of turn. So this is an ability that we will use quite often in this deck, and we can even tap things like equipment or vehicles in order to use the ability, so we can often use the ability 2 or 3 times in the same turn to turn our Gearseekers into unblockable creatures, even if we don't have the 6 mana to use a Gearseeker's activated ability. Then another very powerful card in the deck is a Thopter Spy Network, another payoff card for being a Monoblue Artifact deck, making a Thopter token every turn, and whenever an artifact deals damage to an opponent, we get to draw a card, so this helps us find more action. And then of course the 4 Gearseeker Serpents, which are the centerpiece of the deck. 17 islands, all come into play untapped. 2 copies of Westvale Abbey to turn those tokens and bad creatures into a nice finisher. Then we also have 2 copies of Ruins of Oran-Rief, which does come into play tapped, but can put +1/+1 counters on artifacts that enter the battlefield this turn, essentially, since those are all colorless. Can also put counters on vehicles if we crew them the turn we play them. And then 1 copy of Inventor, which is a legendary land, but it can help us gain some life, and maybe later in the game can also help us find a nice payoff artifact, like a Chief of the Foundry or perhaps a Smuggler's Copter. So that's the deck, and now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which only has 1 land here, so I don't think we can keep. This one looks fine. Turn 1 construct, turn 2 construct, look for a 3rd land, and Spy Network is a nice payoff card here. Opponent with a swamp. This hand is pretty vulnerable to sweeper effects, so we'll have to keep those in mind. But for now, just run out a construct. Black-white with an Ailey, so that's gonna do a good job of blocking all our 2/2 creatures. And Glint-Nest is nice, but I think we really need to find land number 3, so we'll use a Scry here. Alright, keep that on top. And next turn we can choose if we want to run out the Chief or not, and maybe make some attacks. Ailey is gonna get in there. We could double block, but any removal spell kills us, and we're still trading 2 creatures for 1, so that's not great. So we'll just take it, and opponent has a Thalia, which is also pretty annoying here, since a 3/3 won't be able to attack into that profitably. So I think we still do run out Chief of the Foundry, since it's the most mana efficient play, although there's also an argument for running out the Eager Construct so we can hit land number 4. But I think there's higher upside to the Chief here. And no attacks. But at least now we can trade a Bonded Construct for an Ailey if our opponent does attack. Never mind, that's a Selfless Spirit, so now our opponent can make their creatures indestructible. Although I guess we would still be trading a Bonded Construct for a Selfless Spirit, which is not terrible. And here don't have any good attacks, but we can just run out a Caravan, which is actually a pretty nice draw since it's a non-creature artifact for the Spy Network, so it's difficult for the opponent to get rid of it. Unless they've got something like an Anguish they're making. Also just a mana accelerator, so can help us cast the Spy Network next turn. A Blood-Cursed Knight from the opponent, so they might have some enchantments in their deck somewhere. But for now they're playing defense. Alright, let's take a look here. So Whirler Rogue does set up the Spy Network nicely, because then we can hit with an artifact right away and draw a card. So I don't hate running out a Rogue. And it also allows us to start attacking with perhaps the Caravan, since we can make it unblockable. So yeah, let's run out to a Rogue first. The Thopters will come into play tapped, but we can still crew the Caravan by tapping the construct and then make it unblockable by tapping our 2 other artifacts here that are still untapped. So let's make sure to do that now, so we can get in for 6 and hope our opponent doesn't have any sweeper effects, but I guess if they have a Languish they would also kill all their creatures, and they don't have the mana yet for a planar outburst, to which they could use the spirit to make their creatures indestructible, but we're a few turns away from a planar outburst, especially if our opponent misses land number 4. Declaration in Stone can take care of both Thopters if our opponent wants to. Instead they're gonna go with Anguished Unmaking on Whirler Rogue, which does make sense. But now we still have our 2 Thopters and a Spy Network, so we can hit with both Thopters and make sure to draw a card. Next turn our opponent does have that Declaration in Stone that they showed us, which they can use on our Thopters at some point, but at least we'll be making more Thopters and drawing more cards. So definitely interested in playing the Spy Network here. Let's attack with the Thopters. Don't want to trade the Caravan with an Ailey here. And also attacking when we're attacking with the Thopters is not great, because then the Spirit can sacrifice and make Ailey indestructible. So this is fine. Trading a Thopter for a Spirit and drawing a card. And now Westvale Abbey is an interesting twist. I'm not sure if we want to show the Westvale Abbey at this point, but I guess that's fine. And then it does come into play tapped because of Thalia, which will also make our Profane Prince a little worse, since it can't attack right away. But yeah, let's just play out a Bonded Construct. Opponent now has the option to exile 2 Bonded Constructs if they want to with Declaration. Could also go after Chief of the Foundry. Alright, they did find land number 4. Now they have a Bygone Bishop. So they don't want to use the Declaration yet, but the Bygone Bishop does block our 2/2 Thopter tokens. So there's that. We don't want to make a Profane Prince yet, because we know our opponent has Declaration in Stone, which would exile the Profane Prince, which otherwise is indestructible. So we kind of want to have our opponent use the Declaration. So let's, I think, play the Glint-Nest Crane, see what we can find. Alright, Lupine Prototype. Do we just want to run out all our creatures here, or are we afraid of some consequences? Alright, so I think playing out another construct is fine. Get another scry. Maybe help us find something. Bonesaw is not really what we need here. We're more looking for things like Gearseeker Serpent. And sure, let's play out a Prototype. So next turn it can perhaps attack. But no attacks for now. So can't really make a move on the Westvale Abbey until our opponent uses Declaration in Stone. Alright, there we go. They go with the Chief of the Foundry, which does give us a clue. Does make our artifacts significantly smaller. But at some point we could go wide and just ignore the fact that we lose creatures in combat. An aggressive attack from the Bygone Bishop. And this is pretty strange. The AI sacrificing creatures just to gain some life. Get a Thopter from the Spy Network. So let's see. Opponent has 2 blockers. For single mana there's not much they can do besides sacrifice a creature and gain life equal to the toughness. And then they have 2 decent blockers. I think we can start by running out Eager Construct. Since again making the Profane Prince here is not great because of Thalia, it will come into play tapped. And let's see. So if we sack a clue, draw into another Caravan, we should be able to also play the Caravan. So let's keep that on top. Sack a clue. Play a Caravan. And now we can attack with the Lupine Prototype. Flyers are good to go. And I think that's gonna be it. Could also attack with all our 2-powered guys, but 2 of them would just die. And we would be dealing 8. So I don't think attacking with our 2/2s and 2/1s makes sense this turn, but maybe next turn they can all get in there. And let's see if our opponent wants to make some trades. Alright, Ailey trades with a Prototype. We still get to draw a card from the Spy Network. And say go. Haven't seen any Gearseeker Serpents yet. Always watching from the opponent, but they don't have a ton of creatures in play, so we should be able to just go wide. Both creatures get in there, and I don't think we can make any good blocks since Thalia's first strike. Although I guess, never mind, we could have actually crewed the Cultivator's Caravan, which would be a 5/5, which just could have eaten the Thalia. So that's a slight misstep. Opponent has 2 blockers. We have a 2/2 and another 2/2 they can block, and they take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And for single mana they can't really interact. So I think we just attack with everyone, no point in crewing our vehicles. Alright, sweet. On to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is pretty good. We've got some powerful 2-drops and a nice 4-drop. Plus Ruins of Oran-Rief, which we can play tapped on turn 1. So probably just gonna play turn 2 Copter, turn 3 Glint-Nest Crane, which can crew the Copter. Could also run out the Crane turn 2, turn 3 play the Copter and put a +1/+1 counter it after we crew it with the Crane. But I think I would rather just run out the Copter first and go from there. If we draw a 2-drop artifact, that would be nice, since we can put a counter on it right away. Opponent with a Duskwatch Recruiter. Inventor Sphere to draw. So we are definitely going to crew the Copter here with the Glint-Nest Crane. So let's do that right now. See what we can find with the Crane. A Caravan, it's not bad. And attack for 3, mostly so we get to loot with the Copter. And another Copter to draw. Alright, so we'll definitely discard the Skiff. I'll hang on to these lands for a few more turns since we might need them, but we'll probably end up discarding some amount of them. Another Duskwatch, alright. Opponent on banned colors. Foundry Inspector is also interesting. I think this turn we go Whirler Rogue, and then next turn with 5 mana we can go Inspector into Caravan, which is pretty powerful. Yeah, we could also go Caravan into Copter this turn, but I would rather just put the Whirler Rogue in play. And we'll crew using a Thopter token, so we could still trade the Rogue with one of the Duskwatch recruiters if we want to, but I think we will attack with the Crane. Let's loot, don't need another island. But keeping the Rogue in place is nice when we have cards like Cultivator's Caravan, since if we make that one unblockable, getting in for 5 is quite a lot. And we do still have this Ruins of Oran-Rief that we have to keep in mind. Opponent with a Tireless Tracker, but no land to get a clue. We gain one from the Inventor Sphere. Alright, so we can play the construct for free if we have a Foundry Inspector in play. So we could go Foundry Inspector, play Caravan, and also put a Bonded Construct in play. And then we can use some of those artifacts to make some of our creatures unblockable. I think I like that. So we can do this pre-combat. Could also play the Copter here, but I think we can wait until after we loot. Alright, so let's crew the Copter using the Bonded Construct. And then attack with all the flyers. And we'll discard an Eager Construct, and then also play the Copter. We did have the option of attacking with the Whirler Rogue here, if we tap the Caravan and the Inspector, but I think using the mana from the Caravan this turn to put out another 2-drop is pretty nice. And it never hurts to have more Copters in play. Alright, now our opponent has a land and it's Evolving Wilds, so they do get 2 clues, but it might be too late at this point, as they're facing quite the air force. Alright, looks like our opponent does not have any outs. Cards to keep in mind here are Spellqueller, which is just a 2/3 flyer that can jump in front of one of our flyers. Bounding Crisis could have also happened to tap down one of our creatures, but instead a clue gets sacrificed, so we don't have to be afraid of anything. And with the opponent at 7, we have more than 7 power in the air. And 8 damage is not gonna kill us. I guess Fog is one of the cards our opponent could have here. Technically, they could also have a 3 mana flash creature for single green, since they do have now 2 Howlers, which make their creatures cheaper. But that doesn't stop our plan here. So let's crew, so let's tap the Crane. Let's tap a Thopter. And crew with the Inspector. And attack with everyone. Can loot just to see what we would have drawn. Bonesaw. Let's see if we can hit a Gearseeker Serpent. Nope, another construct. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks decent. Rogue plus Caravan is a nice little combo. And if we draw a Serpent, we'll have lots of artifacts to make it cheaper. Opponent with Evolving Wilds into a Plains. And we'll just play an island and say go, no need to reveal the Bonesaw yet. And turn 2 most likely Eager Construct. Alright, opponent on red-white vehicles here with Feather Motorist. Opponent's Cry 2. And here we're gonna play the Construct, so if they did leave some cards on top, we're basically not giving the opponent any value from the Scry 1 that they get. And next turn we can play the Caravan. Copter is a nice one. Question is, do we want to leave it on top or do we need another land? I think leaving it on top is fine, since we do have the Caravan for now to help us cast our 4-drops if we miss on lands. And we don't really want to draw too many lands anyways. Thopter Engineer makes a Thopter and gives artifacts haste. So we go down to 19. But here I think we do play the Caravan over the Copter, since we want to make sure to cast a Rogue next turn. Could also go Sky Skiff plus Smuggler Copter next turn. Opponent has a Fiery Impulse to deal with our Eager Construct. Gets in for 5. But yeah, at this point playing the Rogue seems a lot better, since we can maybe trade with the Thopter or a Veteran Motorist. Sheev is not a bad pickup. Still gonna keep the Bonesaw in hand, but maybe next turn we can play it if the Rogue's abilities start being relevant, because then we can tap the Bonesaw to maybe help make something unblockable. The Pala is unfortunate because now the Motorist is a 4-2 and we can't trade it with a Thopter. So I think I will trade here and just take 3 from the Gearshift Ace, which is a Dwarf, which gets bumped by the Pala. Prototype, not ideal here, so kind of regretting keeping the Copter on top, since now we need the additional lands. So now we have the option of playing out another Rogue. But I actually like playing Chief of the Foundry here quite a bit as well. Let's see. If we play Chief, we could crew the Caravan by tapping 2 of our creatures, and that basically stops all the ground attackers unless our opponent has removal. But I guess we could also play the Copter to do it the same. But yeah, I think playing the Chief is fine here. And we could attack for 2 with the Thopter if we feel adventurous, but I think we want to play defense here. Because if our opponent does have removal, we want to have the additional blocker. Opponent does attack with the Gear Shift Ace, so this could mean they have a Harness Lightning, which 3 damage plus 3 first strike damage from the Gear Shift Ace is enough to kill a 6/6 Caravan that gets +1/+1 from the Chief. So do we want to make that trade Caravan for a Harness Lightning? Opponent could also be pointing that Harness Lightning on our Chief. I guess we could also double block. So let's crew here. And I think we tap down the Rogue. And we could double block Caravan and Thopter, so that if our opponent does have Harness Lightning, we still get to kill the Gear Shift Ace. But then our opponent might just say, okay, I kill the Thopter and play something else. Think we make our opponent have it here. They could also have a pump spell like Build to Smash. Alright, so no tricks, so they just let the Gear Shift Ace die and follow up with a Bygone Bishop. We gain 1 from the Inventor Sphere, and Gearseeker Serpent is a nice draw, so now we get to play out the Bonesaw to make the Serpent cheaper. Putting out an additional flyer to block the Bygone Bishop is not bad. I think I like playing the Smuggler's Copter here. Could also go with the Whirler Rogue, but the Copter is a cleaner block on the Bygone Bishop. So then we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 artifacts in place, so we can actually play Copter plus Serpent, which I think is better. So gotta make sure to leave blue mana untapped. Serpent. And say go. Still gonna play defense for a turn here, but starting next turn we can start attacking. Land number 4 for the opponent. So now the ability from the Whirler Rogue to make creatures unblockable starts being very relevant, especially when we can tap down stuff like Bonesaw to help use the ability. Another Gear Shift Ace, our opponent gets a clue from the Bygone Bishop. And if our opponent does attack with a flyer, we can crew the Smuggler's Copter, so no attacks from the opponent. Gain a life from the Inventor Sphere. And another Chief of the Foundry is a nice draw. So the question here is, do we want to play the Chief or another Rogue? I think playing the Chief is nice. So let's say if our opponent has Declaration in Stone, playing the Chief is not great, since then our opponent gets to kill 2 of our Chiefs, but playing the Rogue is maybe even worse because they get to kill all our Thopters for free. So maybe it's right to play something else to play around Declaration in Stone. So perhaps we can start by activating the Copter and attacking, see what happens. Could also make the Copter unblockable if we tap down 2 artifacts, so a lot of options here. I just crew the Copter with the Rogue. And attack for 4. If our opponent wants to block with the Bishop and use a burn spell on the Copter, that's fine. And Spy Network is a nice one. So Prototype is not looking great here, since we still have a lot of cards in hand. So let's discard that. See what our opponent does. Right, they just take 4. So now we have to decide if we want to play the Spy Network or the Rogue. Think I like running out the Spy Network. And do we still have enough blockers to make some good blocks on our opponents? If they do have a removal spell for one of our guys, maybe it's a bit risky to run out the Spy Network if they can kill the Gearseeker somehow. Think we run out the Spy Network and try to survive 1 turn here. And if we can turn a corner without being dead next turn, then we're in very good shape. So just have to dodge a removal spell on the Gearseeker here. Playing the Rogue was also an option, but again would have been pretty bad if our opponent has a declaration for all the Thopters there. But I guess then they're not using it on the Gearseeker Serpent. But if we get to untap here, I've got a pretty good feeling about this. Alright, so Fleetwheel Cruiser gets +1/+1 from the Pala, can also get crewed by their Motorist to get another +1/+1. So can definitely do some damage. So the Cruiser is getting in there. So the opponent can use the Gear Shift Ace here to make their Fleetwheel Cruiser have first strike. So if we block with the Serpent, we are not going to be able to kill the Cruiser, but I think we still block with the Serpent, otherwise we're taking way too much damage from the Cruiser here. And could also chump the Bishop, but I don't think we want to do that. So let's see what happens. Gain 1 up to 11, get a Thopter, and a land is a nice draw, so we can start emptying our hand a bit. Alright, so can definitely play a land, and we have access to 5 mana. So we could go Sky Skiff plus Chief, or we could go Rogue and maybe equip the Bonesaw. I like playing Rogue as it puts a lot of bodies into play. And perhaps we can crew the Caravan here. So let's see, we can crew the Caravan with Thopters, crew the Smuggler's Copter. But are we leaving enough defense then? Perhaps we're not. So maybe we play it slow and just attack with the Smuggler's Copter here. Although, let's see, our opponent's at 16. I think maybe attacking with 6 power in the air is fine. We're still leaving back enough blockers for the Cruiser. Another Spy Network. I guess we can get rid of the Sky Skiff. Opponent falls to 10. We draw a card from the Spy Network, another island. Alright, I think we just say go here. And our opponent is dead next turn to our flyers unless they have Declaration in Stone, which they do. So let's crew the Caravan with our Thopters here. Thopters are dead, but we still have enough defense that we should not be dead here. So the cruiser gets crewed. Now the question is, do we want to put the Caravan in front just to prevent some damage, or do we take the damage? 7-5, so they can attack for 7, give it first strike. If they also attack with a bishop, they can hit us for 9. Sky Whaler's shot on our Caravan. Yep, that happens. So don't have any great blocks here because of the gear shift ace, so we're taking 9. And we're probably gonna die next turn, which is not great. Gain 1 from the Inventor sphere, which is desperately trying to keep us alive. Alright, Gearseeker's a nice draw. So can go chief into another Gearseeker. I think that's our only play here, and we have to play defense. Although, let's see. If we crew the Copter, which is now a 5-5, it's another 3, 8, 9, 10. Do we have 4 artifacts to tap? We do not. We only have 3. So we needed 1 more artifact here to win. That's unfortunate. Can we afford to attack with the Copter? Maybe we do. Because we do need to close out the game. Westvale Abbey is interesting. Let's keep that one. Draw a card from the network, another rogue. Alright, so we gotta survive this turn. Opponent has Always Watching. All their creatures have +1/+1 and Vigilance. They have 5 attackers and we have 5 blockers and we're at 3. But next turn we do have another Whirler Rogue, which can both help us crew the Copter and make it unblockable. We also have this tapped Whirler Rogue in play, which can also attack for 2, so 2 from the Rogue plus 3 from the Copter should be enough to kill our opponent. So we just have to make sure to survive this attack. Cruiser goes online, opponent just has a land in play, but they're gonna play it so they can maybe use the Palace ability, which if she becomes tapped they can pay some amount of mana. They can still use their Gear Shift Ace and the Veteran Motorist to crew the cruiser and give them their respective abilities. Gotta block the flyer, otherwise we're dead. Alright, so we're not dead. The opponent decided not to crew the cruiser with their 2 dwarves that were still untapped. So we get to play Westvale Abbey, we get to play Whirler Rogue, and Rogue can make our other Rogue unblockable with the 2 Thopters, and we can also crew, let's see, so we can play the Crane, have 4 artifacts left. Miss. Crew Copter with Crane. Attack with the Rogue and Copter. And we have exactly 4 artifacts. Make sure to make the Rogue unblockable. And there we go, exactly 4 artifacts left to make our 2 creatures unblockable. And their opponent's at 5, and they are dead. That was a super close game. Alright, I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. And as always, have a nice day.